All right, so we have, after quite an extensive deliberation, we have come to the decision that we are going to do this dialectic into dialogos on agape, and specifically agape as a virtue, and not necessarily the metaphysical principle or something like that, but the place that we relate to agape, and it relates to us as a virtue. So Daniel, what is agape?
So Sandra said just before the recording started that agape is slippery. And I think that's true. Agape is a mediation of the all-embracing
The mediation of an all-embracing
immediacy towards all suffering beings.
Would you like to hear that back, Daniel?
Yeah, I'll write it down as well.
I have agape is a mediation of the all-embracing immediacy towards all suffering beings.
Yes.
A couple more times, Sandra. I just want to get that. You say it a couple more times, Sandra?
Yep, sorry. Agape is a mediation of the all-embracing immediacy towards all suffering beings. Agape is a mediation of the all-embracing immediacy towards all suffering beings. Agape is a mediation of the all-embracing immediacy towards all suffering beings. Agape is a mediation of the all-embracing immediacy towards all suffering beings.
Can I just, I know that's against the protocol, but Guy, I would like to hear how that feels for you when you hear that.
Oh, it's good. The all-embracing immediacy, right? Like this has already happened in some sense, right? And is happening. Really does feel like it feels like that really grips into me. The mystery is in the mediation, all right? Like what you mean by the mediation of the immediate.
Because this all-embracing immediacy already has us.
Yeah.
It kind of like we have been loved before. And now the task for someone who wants to enact this as a virtue is to become a mediator, and that means to now pass it on to, let's say, your children, suffering beings that are in need of that love.
Yeah, okay. Is another way of saying that, would this be correct? Like that agape is that always already love, right? That I can take up, i.e. mediate, through the way I respond to suffering beings, right? Through gathering, like, in some sense, letting that love that I'm mediating, right, in some sense, embrace beings, essentially.
And just when you say this, mediation, I think, can be twofold. So you can give love, but you also need to let that love enter you, because you can also shun it. You can, oh, I don't want to be loved. I'm.
Yeah. It's a mediation that accounts for that two-way sense of it, that you're giving it or you're letting it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But also you're opening yourself to it. And that can be the same act. That can happen in the same gesture, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like if I serve, like, so say that there's, somebody suffering on the street, and I gesture love towards them. I don't know, in whatever form that is, right? I serve. That very serving can be the simultaneous process of opening to agapic love, the all-embracing immediacy, and also giving it or allowing it, if you will, at the same time. That's the mediation.
Yeah. Because ultimately you're not the source of that love. You're just you're not. It's not. It has come. It comes. It doesn't come from you. Ultimately, it comes from, let's say, God.
Yeah.
There it comes, and then you just you pass it on. You don't store it up like some hidden treasure or so, but you give it away. That's why that's what it's there for. But,
would you say more about this? So the all-embracing immediacy, right?
So the immediacy that I think Sandra has shared that word with us before we started the recording. And it resonated with me, the kind of always already everlasting dareness of this kind of love. Which is, again, all embracing.
Yeah.
But the human being can, it's embracing us, but the human being can really close itself off from this. Well, we talked before, I think you said in nature is this immediacy and this opens us, this makes us free, this makes us feel good. While we, for some reason, we can also close ourselves off from this embrace, you know.
Right. So in terms of opening ourselves, right, to this all-embracing immediacy, I'll ask you this question, and I would imagine it has something to do with this closure in relationship to it, and an opening in relationship to it. But I was going to say, by what sense organ, or figuratively put, by what organ do I sense this all-embracing love? What is it? Is it is it a sense of being, whatever it is that has me be defended, right? And sense into like my contraction as a being, and then I undefend in some way. Is it something I see? Is it something I know? Is it something I hear? What's the organ that I use to sense it all embracing?
So just for the viewers, listeners, we did a kind of relational meditation exercise, mindfulness exercise before we started this. And we just did turns of saying then at the end the sentence, then love is. Now I'm trying to remember from where I have been speaking during that process. I mean, my answer would not be from the heart, but not like from my physical heart, but from my heart, soul heart. I don't know. From this strange.
Well, if you think about it,
I have a tear here, right?
Yeah.
From that, yeah. From the heart.
Just like the heart, like if we just look at it as a metaphor or symbol, like just as a pump, it takes in blood that's used, right? And it reoxygenates it, right? It brings life into it, right? But it actually, in some sense, draws in blood that is, I don't know, not usable, toxic, not usable by the body or whatever, and it transforms it into, you know, blood going out of our arteries into our bodies that replenish us, right? While drawing in the blood that doesn't replenish us, right? In some sense, in that oxygen. So just kind of looking at that metaphor, I'm just wondering, because I think what I'm hearing in this all-embracing immediacy and its relationship to the suffering, right? This, and you said that it's the heart that would know in some sense or feel this all-embracing immediacy.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's also the heart, that is moved or that trembles if we see someone who is suffering or is in need of love, then, you know, we say, you know, we are moved to tears, or we are shaken, you know. It's like we say something like, I don't know, I was, you know, what is moved when we see something like that? It's like the heart, it's something in, I don't know quite what that is. I mean, I know what it is, but it's beyond words. The soul. I don't have a definition now for the soul. That's good. But the mediation goes, I think, through that. It's also right. The soul is drawing us to help others.
Yeah. So it's like there's something here. What I'm hearing you say is there's a drawnness, right, to helping others, and helping others would be in some sense enacting this all-embracing love.
Yeah.
And that there's something about this mediation, right, that seems to be implicitly able to see suffering as something to enact this immediacy.
Yeah, suffering is like that which calls forth this mediation.
Right.
Or I wasn't sure if I should say all suffering beings. Maybe you want to fine-tune that in your proposal. It's like it can be suffering, but it's also its vulnerability, its nakedness. It's all of these things that, because, you know, when you see a baby completely naked, unprotected, unsheltered, vulnerable, then you know, you're also called to love that being.
Yeah.
We might not say it's suffering necessarily, but there's a kind of vulnerability, at least, that calls forth this mediation.
Yeah. Daniel, can I read this to you again, and I'll leave out suffering and see how it feels, having discussed what you mean by mediation and so forth. Agape is a mediation of the all-embracing immediacy towards all beings. Agape is a mediation of the all-embracing immediacy towards all beings.
That feels it feels almost more divine. That feels like the divine side. But I think as human beings with kind of like limited time, limited resources, limited attention, I think this is more like we have to perform it on the most vulnerable, suffering beings.
Right.
Where we, you know, like sometimes, you know, you see some beings are suffering more, are in a greater need of that agape. I mean, all beings are in need, but especially here on the earthly realm, I think, you know, some people are really in need, you know, really, you know, that's then where we are called to perform it, I guess. When I say all beings, it's like, that's like divine, that feels divine, that feels almost non-human. It feels more like divine reality.
So you would leave in all suffering beings?
No, I guess I would make a distinction between agape that comes from God and then the agape that we mediate.
Okay.
Something like that. But that's a mystery for the next term.
There's this toward. This mediation is turning toward, right? And I'm here. I think what I'm hearing is that as a virtue, right? That this is where it's it's in some sense you have to enact it, right? You can't just, it has to be an action of some kind in some way, right? This mediation, it's not, it can't just be abstract. You can't just know.
Exactly.
Right? It's a responsiveness to the vulnerability of the world, right? That is also simultaneously a realizing of this all-embracingness, right? Not like as a human being, it's not like it's not like you're at one with this all-embracingness, right? In some sense, you probably you probably have to not necessarily feel it, but in the giving, in the service, in the way that you mediate, right? One, in some sense, maybe comes to feel it in the giving of it. So it's kind of like, is it something like the vulnerability, right? Is the site to get, is the site to give. It calls forth the giving of the love.
Yeah. That sounds, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. I just, in what you just said, I just realized a kind of mystery in the sense that we cannot, we have to also learn how to love that. We cannot just love all beings. We cannot, that kind of like that, when I felt it, it really felt like, oh, only God can love all beings. But we have to train that, you know, we have to make like baby steps. First, maybe love our family. And then maybe if we really love our family, and then we can maybe extend this maybe to neighbors. And then maybe we can extend it to like people in the village who like really, I don't know, really suffering, or so, people nearby. And maybe we can then extend it to even strangers. But I think that's at least the sense I'm getting. It's there's just the call comes from all beings ultimately. But I think we cannot, attuning to that is more like in the saintly realm, on the godlike realm. There's just a dimension of learning how to mediate that is a task in itself, I guess.
So Sandra, you want to say the original one again?
Yeah,
and just
so the original, do you want me to leave out the suffering, or do you want me to put it in, Daniel?
Daniel, how about we start with the suffering?
Okay.
And then you can...
And then maybe leave it out and see how they both feel.
I think I would insert something. I would say agape it has to do with the directions. Agape enacted as a human virtue is the mediation. I think I would insert that.
Okay. So agape enacted as a virtue is a mediation of the all-embracing immediacy towards all suffering beings. Agape enacted as a virtue.
Agape enacted as a human virtue.
Of a human virtue.
Is the mediation of the divine all-embracing immediacy.
Okay. Agape enacted as a human virtue is a mediation of the divine all-embracing immediacy toward all suffering beings.
There is a mystery there. I'm not sure what to do with that.
Okay. Okay.
Towards I would replace that with vulnerability. Towards vulnerability. After what Guy has said, I like that. That feels apt now. That fits.
Toward human vulnerability or just toward vulnerability?
Towards vulnerability.
Okay. Okay, I'll read it again.
There is something there. Yeah, interesting.
Agape, enacted as a human virtue, is a mediation of the divine all-embracing immediacy towards vulnerability.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you both.
Yeah, totally. So I think when I'm going into appreciation, so what I'm appreciating is, well, one, the slipperiness of this, right? Right. That it's really kind of, in order to begin to bring it into a proposition, immediately you're stepping on things that are not obvious, right? What they are.
Just one thing, I'm immediately drawn to what John would call the other levels of knowing. So I was immediately trying to go back to like, what is my body saying? What is the world? What is my participation with the world telling me? So I was immediately drawn to those levels.
Yeah.
Which makes it super slippery.
Totally. It's participatory knowing. Yeah. It seems to be something gives us also the ability to have the proper perspective on the world, such that the vulnerable parts of the world call service out of us in some sense, right? Like, so I appreciated just the respectfulness implicit in what you were saying, and just sensed, I think I sent and appreciated the sense of which this one, Daniel, is really close to your heart and seems super important to you. And I just felt that, like in your being, or something about your being that has an affinity with agape love. Yeah. What I found mysterious, what's still mysterious to me, like so much is mysterious to me. It's this relationship between the felt, like the contact with agapic love, like it basically, let's say, for lack of a better word, it coming into me, that relationship, like how does it come into me, and then how does it come out of me, right, and towards the world, right? And the same thing with the world. How does it come into the world, and how does it come toward me? Now that's where the mystery is, I think, for me. I think where this, what I anticipate is, there's an at one-ment here that this is going towards. I don't know what, but it just feels like if I follow my neurons, right, towards, and my neurons are gathered, get closer and closer to agape, it feels like they're all pointing towards some sense of unity. And I would suppose, in some sense, that the suffering, right, or the vulnerability, right, is precisely about this kind of loss of that unity in some way, right? The further away from that unity, the more vulnerable I am, and the higher the need, if you will. So there's kind of like, so there's a couple of things. First, before I make a proposal, I just want to kind of walk around it a little bit, because there's so many things that kind of got triggered and stimulated in this. So one of the things that's compelling to me is I couldn't help but think about my experiences in circling, and how there is it's like there's a deepening sense of this, right? Where, like, for example, in circling, the premise or the intentions, right, that you have in circling is to be with what is, right? And you say the aspirational sense is the challenge is how profoundly can we be with what is, and that is surprisingly difficult, right? And this experience of looking at the heart of someone's pain and their suffering, and not fixing them, and not helping them, and not doing all of these kind of actions that, and just in some sense doing that, like, is it's opening to their, in some sense, it's opening to their vulnerability. Like, I'm opening to their vulnerability, and there's something profound in that, right? That it's profound for me as the person who's witnessing it, and it's oftentimes profound for the person who I'm witnessing, right? There's something transformative about just sitting still with and looking directly at the heart of the truth of what's happening for that person, and not solving it, not wishing it be a different way, not any of that stuff, but just really, in some sense, I guess it's in a certain sense, it's a deep hearkening to it, and a conformity with it, and it's the practice is working through the struggles of all that, right? So like when you talked about, Daniel, the sense of being human, right? Like, if we talk about this as a, as a saint, right, or as from God's perspective, it's going to be really different than if we talk about it from a human being's perspective. So, like, just the sense of having agapic love as the aspiring source, right? Immediately, everything in the way of that or different than that shows up, right? And so, on some level, the coming to agapic love, right, is synonymous with coming, is coming through the obstacles to it in some way. And that seems like a big part of it to me, right? With agapic love is that this enactment of the love, the performing the love, right? And it's, I just have so much experience of not necessarily feeling it, but knowing it's needed, and then starting to give and to serve and orient from that place. And in the actual walking and the receiving, and like that then I start to feel it. It becomes a feeling, right? But oftentimes not before, right? So this is one of the things that has me curious about what is this access to this agapic, this all-embracing immediacy, right? What is that organ that kind of affords me to begin to perform it, right, towards the beings that are suffering? So just anything, I'd just love to hear kind of what you're hearing, Sandra or Daniel, so far.
So what I'm hearing is that the process of mediation, that process or that act is fraught with all kinds of blindness, closed offness, all that, that part it's sort of like the preparing myself in order to be a mediator seems to be key to this ability to practice or to enact the virtue. That seems to be of crucial importance, because if you can enact a virtue by any number of false ways of pretending, and for all false reasons, but that possibly that looking carefully at what it entails to be that mediator and to drop, I suppose, all the obstacles that come, or to somehow let them go. That's the key to practicing it. It's not an act of will, it's an act of surrender, actually.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing.
Totally.
And I'm also hearing that when I do that and I am surrendered to all that in myself, I am also surrendered to the reality that I see before me with that person. And that provides the mirror for that person to, maybe for the first time, to actually see the reality of themselves.
That's what I would imagine is reflected in that witnessing that I was talking about. Because that's just really always struck me about this aspect of circling, where you just don't do all the things that you're inclined to do, right? Which in some level it's a pushing away from it. It can be a rejection, calling itself helping or something like that. But there's this way that circling kind of the constraints around it afford you to be able to not do that, and then just continually be in the presence of it, understand it more, stand under it, see it more, be in the presence of it, walk your way really into it. And that in itself ends up being this extraordinary experience of, can be healing, it can be all these different things, right?
Yeah.
But in some sense, you're letting go of all of that. Like, you can't do it to heal, you can't do it to, like, there's this kind of element of an unconditionality, right? To it. That, okay, there it is. Okay, there it is. Okay, so it's, I think that the mediating and the aspiration in this, or the remembering, as we want to say, the remembering the virtue is a participatory, it's a participatory knowing, right? That is surrendering in coming to conformity to the unconditionality of the all-embracing immediacy.
With the unconditionality of the all-embracing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll read that back to you. Of the all-embracing. Okay. The mediating or remembering. I put mediating / remembering.
Yeah, that's
is
great.
A participatory knowing that surrenders, that is surrendering in coming into conformity with the unconditionality of the all-embracing.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Guy, what is the virtue of agape?
It's the participatory knowing as a coming into conformity with the all-embracing immediacy, whatever it is that I said that you
with the unconditionality of the all-embracing.
The unconditionality of the all-embracing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that unconditionality that is what I'm practicing, and that's it's also the surrendering in some sense.
Participatory knowing through surrender? By means of surrender?
Yeah, it's like a surrendering to the unconditionality of the heart being, right? In some sense.
Coming into conformity by surrendering to the unconditionality of the all-embracing?
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay, I'll read it over.
That's great.
Agape is the participatory knowing and the coming into conformity with by surrendering to the unconditionality of the all-embracing.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Two. Okay. Agape is the participatory knowing and the coming into conformity by surrendering to the unconditionality of the all-embracing.
Yes. That's great. Because there's this element, there is just this element, what I'm appreciating is that there's this element of, like, you know, for example, when I get this sense of, like, the Pope, let's say, right, like talking to the poor, right, or conversing with somebody really, really, like, down and out or whatever, there's this element where he's not any better. Like in fact, if anything, he's humbled in the face of what he is somehow in contact with through that vulnerability, right? So it's really interesting because it's like on one level, from the person who's suffering, right, who's vulnerable, let's say, it's like they're as far away as they can get, right, from God, let's say, right? But yet from the Pope's perspective, like that very vulnerability seems like it shines forth what he is to conform to, because he can see it somehow. It's an opening to God. It's an opening to that, right? And there's something about that relationship that seems like from the poor, like the down and out person, they're far away from that. The Pope comes in that vulnerability is a vulnerability to that in him that is worthy of dropping to his knees and kissing his feet, right? Like there's something so divine in that, right? And then that experience somehow makes a wholeness in there, right? There's a wholeness, a coming to wholeness in that exchange that seems really, really important. But I want to keep that. I just want to keep. I think. Let's keep that. I'll keep that proposal as it is.
Okay, let's keep that proposal as it is. I'm looking at our time, so we'll have to wrap up, right?
Yeah.
What I can do is just write out the two proposals so far.
Yeah.
Right, and then we'll continue next time. Is that all right?
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because this could go, this is.
Yeah, I have a feeling this one we may be harkening on
for a while.
Yeah, for a while.
Yeah.
Chewing on this bone. Right.
Yeah. It's a slippery fish.
Yeah. Totally. Any initial, like, any thoughts, Sandra, about like what do you think about Agape?
I think myself that the surrendering piece is absolutely crucial, because there is a sense that to practice true agape and not any of the shadows of agape, not any of that stuff, not any of the look how good a person I am, not any of the look how wonderful I am at listening to you, all that stuff that's why I say it's slippery. It's so easy to take this on and only adorn myself with the virtue of, this virtue, how wonderful this virtue is, because it's the key, as Daniel said, it's the key that has brought us into this new world, new life. But always for me, no matter what I think it is, it's probably not that, and if I just surrender and try to be as much in conformity with the truth of myself as I can, probably I'm creating this space for agape to start flowing. That's what I think, but at this point, because surrendering in coming into conformity with the unconditional. You know, like, it seems that that's really all that I can do myself, you know, out of myself. The rest is, I mean, just allowing it to, I don't have to help anybody. I don't have to heal anybody. I don't have to save anybody. I can't do that. But I can offer them this, if I practice this virtue, I can offer them this virtuous space in which they might be able to find the space to, heal themselves. Yeah.
That's really good. I think that's really good.
Yeah, but this even talking about this, I mean, it sort of dropped me to my knees, because I know, I know that I can't go out and say, okay, I'm going to practice agape. That's
if I would say that would be the most heuristical thing I've uttered in the entire year.
Stay away from that guy. He's trying to practice agape.
Yeah.
I just imagine that.
What if we said, like, if you said, let's go out and practice seeing the unconditional in all beings.
Yeah. What about if we said that?
Right.
I mean, yeah, really. Wouldn't that be neat? Yeah. Seeing that in, in others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So.
All right. So how about we just go out and this week?
Yeah.
Just practice.
I can do that.
Maybe as a last thing, I feel now in the last, I don't know, I feel as if some of the other virtues like reverence and surrendering, some of these other virtues we did, they kind of like they're gathering now, because we need all of what we did to move through this territory. It's like we need all of them.
We really do. Yeah.
We need all levels of knowing. We need all our virtues.
Humility is one for sure. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Next week.